Hey, welcome back to How to Clinical Research. I'm Eric Lambert, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, really, and that is the business side of clinical research. And we're going to hone in on the strategy involved when creating a clinical research site. So for those of you out there, you entrepreneurs, you site owners, whether you're a current site owner or you want to own a site, this video is really for you. So we're going to start going over kind of why you would choose to do certain things, why you would want to avoid maybe certain other things, and really just some key strategic moves to make at the beginning and throughout your ownership of this research site. Some of the strategy that's involved in making some of the key decisions. So first of all, let's talk about one of the major things you're going to run into, and that's going to be contracts and budgets. Okay, you're going to have to contract with various people and various companies. So one of the major entities you're going to be negotiating with and having contracts and budgets with are sponsors, right, or CROs. With that said, when creating your CTAs with the sponsors for clinical trials, there's a few things you want to have in your contracts and in your budgets that will help produce some greater profits for you, but also more importantly will protect you in various situations. Now, I'm not a lawyer, okay? I'm not a CPA, so this is not any sort of legal advice or financial advice. This is just for your own entertainment purposes, and this is my own opinion based on my own experiences. So let's go ahead and get into it. One of the major things you want to have in your CTA is a late payment penalty. So this would be maybe like a 5% fee you charge on the balances due when they're not paid on time. This type of language in your contracts and your CTAs with sponsors will help avoid late payments because sponsors operate on a budget, and if they go over their budget because of paying stupid fees, they're going to get in trouble. So they're going to most likely always pay on time when you have a clause like this written into your CTA. So I highly recommend that. Another thing is to always push to get net 30. That means you're getting paid within 30 days of invoicing the sponsors. So a lot of sponsors like to push this quarterly payments, right? They want to pay you every 3 months. That is horrible. Never agree to that, okay? Never, ever agree to that. Throughout my entire career, okay, I have never accepted payments that are paid quarterly, ever. I've always, for the most part, okay, unless there's certain situations where I had to accept maybe like a net 45-day payment, but almost always I have gotten net 30 payments. Now, one of the ways that you can manage to do this is when you're talking with them, okay, and they want to push this quarterly payment terms in the contract, is you tell them, hey, do you guys pay your bills quarterly? And they're going to say, what do you mean? And you're going to say, well, your bill is like your what you pay when do you pay your employees? When do you pay your electricity bills? When do you pay all the other bills that are involved with running your company? And then they're going to say, well, we pay them every month, right? And say, okay, me too. I have monthly expenses, monthly bills. Getting income quarterly does not jive with paying bills monthly, okay? It's just not going to happen. It's not feasible to run a company that way. So you want to talk to them in this kind of manner where you are expressing the unrealistic aspect of it, of being paid quarterly, and how since you have bills monthly and employees to pay, weekly or bi-weekly, that you need to make sure you're getting money in every month. Okay, so that's one way to push it. And you never really want to settle for anything, I would say, above net 45 days. The only reason why certain sponsors wouldn't be able to do net 30, physically do it, is because maybe their accounting department just doesn't have the capabilities to meet a demand of net 30. Sometimes that's true. And many times you can just agree to a net 45 then. It gives them a little bit extra time to meet those demands. And with those late payment penalties of 5% on the balance, after day 30, so on day 31 it starts accruing, that's going to help avoid late payments as well. So another important thing is in your budgets with these contracts is to have a overhead of 30 to 35%. Now that's a little high, but the way you get away with that is you have to have a rationale letter. And this rationale letter is going to detail some of the important or unique aspects of running your specific company. Okay, this could be maybe you live in a expensive city, and therefore you have, expensive services, expensive employees, expensive rent, etc. All of that will lead to a higher overhead to run your company, and therefore you need to have a higher overhead on your budgets. It could be examples such as those that are just unique to your company. Okay, so you have to think about that. Maybe you rent from a hospital, so you have to pay a facilities use payment every month, right, on top of your lease or something like that. So whatever the issue is, make sure you detail some of the key expenses that are unique to your company, and you submit that along with your budget as justification for the 30 to 35% overhead. And you always want to start on the high end, start 35. If they really push back, then give them a hard time, but these are negotiation tactics, right? Maybe fall back to 30%, and that's okay. If you're within that range of 30 to 35%, you're doing really good. The next thing to talk about, which is maybe where a lot of people might get wrong, right? Because maybe they're thinking about it a little bit incorrectly, is working with physicians, okay? If you're creating a company, just because they are a doctor does not mean that they should get shares of your company, right? And this all depends. Whoever gets shares of your company is strictly dependent on your specific situation. Maybe you're the person that knows how to create the company. Maybe you're the person with all the clinical research experience, but maybe you are not a doctor. Maybe you don't have money to start up the entire company. Maybe you need funding. Maybe you need access to more physicians and you only know maybe a couple physicians. And maybe there's a physician out there that has all those things for you. Maybe that physician has a private practice that he'll let you do your business in, right? Maybe that physician has a large network of other physicians that he can get you in to do business with. Maybe that physician is willing to help fund the startup of the company. If that's the case, by all means, that physician deserves shares, and maybe like a 50-50 split between you and him, because he or she would be funding and providing a lot of resources, and you would be essentially managing and creating the company. So those are two really important aspects, and those deserve probably a split of shares in that situation. However, if you have everything set up and you're able to have your own office or work out of another doctor's office, and you have access to patients, you have everything, and you find another doctor that wants to work with you, that doesn't mean that doctor needs to get shares, okay? So that brings me to my next point of, do you contract with the doctor or do you partner with the doctor, right? Now, that decision depends on some of the scenarios that I just listed for you there. But I would say for the most part, most physicians, you're going to want to contract with them. So a doctor that wants to join you or work with you, maybe they have a new specialty that you're trying to get into. Maybe they are in a different location, a different geographic location that you want to have access to for those patients. It could be a number of reasons why you want to work with this doctor and why that doctor wants to work with you. You want to contract with them. So what you do is you set up a contract and you pay them for each trial that they work on with you, and you essentially pay them for the visits that they conduct, the procedures that they conduct at each visit. So pretty much in the budget, when you're negotiating the budgets with the sponsors, you're going to have a PI fee lined in there. And that PI fee is essentially going to go to your PI, right? But don't pay that doctor if they are not doing work, right? If they try to have you fill in for them, like maybe if you have another sub-I that can fill in, and they're the PI, and then they expect to get paid, in that situation, you may want to maybe lower what you're paying them, because you want to pay them for the services that they're doing for you. And if they're not really contributing and they're just relying on you to do all the work and they're just sending you patients, that may not be really worth their full payment. So you want to be upfront with them in the very beginning, talk about these things, discuss them, negotiate them, and put it clearly in the contract as to what would require them to receive payment. What would they need to do in order to receive payment. The next thing to consider are contracts with vendors. So running a clinical research site, there's going to be various vendors that you're working with. Some of them would be maybe medical supply vendors, maybe the bio-waste vendors. These are the guys that are going to pick up, like, they use needles and bio-waste trash and things like that. This would be maybe you're working with a study broker. Okay, these study brokers are the ones that provide clinical trials, like the contacts and sources for clinical trials so you can conduct business. So you also have contracts with companies like maybe calibration companies and like CTMS companies, right? And these are all really essential vendors you're going to need to run your company. So, keep that in mind, that you're going to have negotiations with various companies, various vendors, and you just need to know which ones you're going to need. And it really depends on your situation, because if you are working outside of out of a private medical practice, that physician will already have most of these services that you're going to need, right? So you could just use those services that physician is already providing. And that could be part of your business relationship with that physician. Maybe you own 100% your own research site, so you need to get all these things from scratch, right? So all that depends on your own current situation. So another thing to keep in mind are your employees, okay? Your employees, you have to protect yourself essentially when hiring employees as a business owner. So what I would recommend is to have obviously employee contracts where the employee signs, but you also need to have things like non-compete clauses. They should sign an NDA or a CDA, and this just helps keep everything kosher. Everyone's protected under these types of paperwork that they're signing, types of agreements. So make sure you do those. Don't overlook this. This is really important, especially if you have maybe an angry employee at you in the future and they might do some things that you're not happy with, right? And these contracts that you have in place might be able to protect you, at least in court if you ever went that way. So make sure you protect yourself in that manner. Now, the next thing, which I've touched on a little bit, are the facilities, right? There's lots of different ways that you can get a office to work out of for your research site, right? So one of them that I mentioned would be a private medical practice. So with a private medical practice, that's really ideal because you're only working with the one doctor who owns the practice, and he or she is calling the shots in that office, and it's very easy, communication with that person. So it's fairly easy to get things done, get contracts signed, start work and all of that. That's a really good way to do it because you can really keep your overhead down. Now, another option, of course, is to open up your own research center from the beginning. Rent your own office space. Obviously, that creates a lot, or requires a lot greater funding, to start off. But it might give you maybe a better situation that you're looking for. So, for instance, working with the PI, you're not going to be able to essentially do whatever you want out of the PI's office, right? Because out of his or her medical practice, they're the ones, like I said, that call the shots. So you essentially have to ask them for permission to do anything. Maybe you want to have the freedom to do as you wish in your own office space. And that might be a reason why you would want to have your own private office. Now, another thing is to maybe rent space from a hospital. And when you rent space from a hospital, that might give you access to the physicians that they have working in the hospital, right? So it might make it easier to do maybe like inpatient trials rather than just outpatient trials. So it really depends on which doctors you're working with, which trials you're trying to get into, how many specialties you want to do. All of that really will depend on the structure you use, the strategy you use for getting the office space that you're going to work out of. Me personally, I would probably lean towards, in the very beginning at least, working out of a private medical practice. It's much easier to start if you have a good relationship with the doctor. It's fairly easy to do. It keeps the cost down, which is probably really important, especially in a startup company. So I would probably go that route. But again, every situation is different, and it might lead to different decisions in this case. Okay, so another part of this is you might ask yourself, how big of an office do you need? All right, at least to start off. And I would say not very big at all. Having 2 patient rooms is plenty. I could tell you with 2 patient rooms, I was able to generate $1.4 million a year with 2 patient rooms. Okay, so it really depends on what trials you're getting, the volume of studies or the volume of patients that you're enrolling per study, the budgets you're negotiating, how attractive those studies are for patients to want to join. There's a lot that goes into how to choose a clinical trial that can generate that kind of money. So what I could say is it's all about quality over quantity and being cost effective and efficient with your time, right? So you don't need a lot of space to make a lot of money, right? So having 2 patient rooms and maybe 2 or 3 offices to work out of, if it's you and maybe you have 1 or 2 staff members, that's plenty. You can make plenty of money that way. Okay, so don't get too caught up with wanting to have, a giant office space to make lots of money. You don't really need a giant office space to make lots of money. And then, of course, as you expand, you're going to want to eventually get bigger office space. So you got to kind of judge that by your growth trajectories and analyzing the business and understanding the business to know when it's time to actually make that jump. The last part that I want to talk about is the business development side of this. And this is, a lot of this happens in the beginning. How are you going to form the company? Obviously, you want to have an actual company, right? A company that is its own entity. So you can either make an LLC or you can make a C Corp, right? You can incorporate. So that will depend on, I think, what you want to do with the company. The C Corps are a little bit more complicated to make. They are more expensive for sure. You'll probably most likely want to have a lawyer help you create the C Corp because there's a lot of parts associated to it. There's, for instance, different types of shares you can have, different classes of shares that have different attributes to them, such as maybe voting rights or not voting rights and etc. Right? So you're going to want to have a lawyer to figure out, how many shares do you want to have in the company? How many shares do you want to release in the beginning if you want to hold any for the future? Do you want to eventually maybe make the company public? If that's a plan for yours, then maybe the C Corp might be the way to go. If you're looking for something simpler to start, easier to manage, the LLC is the way to go then in that case. And if you look at a lot of companies, I would say most companies that I've seen at least, they elect to be an LLC. And what's really cool about that is both the LLC and the C Corp can file with the IRS as an S Corp. And the S Corp is another really nice strategy to use once your company develops. So for instance, the C Corp is an actual corporation. The S Corp is not an actual corporation. It is a tax filing status, essentially. But it allows you to take advantage of essentially get some tax advantages when you file as an S Corp. Now keep this in mind. When you first file, let's say as an LLC, is good to maybe not elect to be an S Corp because you may not be able to give yourself a salary. Okay, and that's a requirement if you're going to file as an S Corp with the IRS. So in the beginning, if you need to build revenue and get studies and build your wealth essentially, you're going to want to just keep it as a regular LLC status with the IRS. And as you are able to pay yourself a fair wage, okay, and this will be determined by you working with your CPA, then at that time you might want to elect to be an S Corp with the IRS. So what that does is it essentially helps you avoid double taxation. So essentially you would hire yourself as an employee under the S Corp, and you would pay yourself a salary as an employee under the S Corp, right? And as you pay yourself as an employee, that's payroll, and you're going to have taxes taken out of that and everything else, which lowers the taxes that you have to pay for the corporation. So it essentially just helps you save a little bit of tax money there. And then the rest of the money you would take as dividends whenever you so choose to take dividends as a business owner. And this just helps, again, with the amount of money you're paying in taxes. So just look into that a little bit more. There's plenty of resources online as to why you'd want to choose one or the other. Me personally, I would go with the LLC. Most companies elect to be an LLC anyways. And I think that's for good cause, right? They're simpler to manage. They're easier to start, cheaper to start. And I feel it's a good strategy to use that can still allow you to take advantage of the S Corp later on in the future. All right, so another really important part, which I touched on before, is funding, right? How are you going to fund the company? That's a really important question, and that's something you need to figure out in the very beginning when you're planning to make the company. There's a few things you could do, right? You can get a loan. You can save up your money to start the company. And the amount of money that you're going to need really depends on the strategy that you're going forward with. If you want to open up your own private research site from the get-go, hire staff and everything that's involved with that. I could tell you from experience, you're going to need about $80,000 to do that. Okay, that's a lot of money. If you want to work out of a private medical practice, you need far less. You need maybe just a few grand to kind of keep the company afloat in the beginning while you get things moving, right? So that's going to determine as well as to where you get your money from. Where you get your money from. I mentioned getting a loan, saving money, but the best way is to get people to invest with you, and these would be your partners. These would be people that you actually give shares to, right? So maybe you're working with a few different people. A really important aspect to have for your company is a lawyer. And lawyers are really expensive, especially corporate lawyers. So if you find a lawyer that is actually interested in investing with you, that might be a good way to go, because maybe they get some shares and they're now, responsible for the corporation's legal aspects, but they have a vested interest in the company, right? And that way you have a lawyer for life, essentially, of the company, or for as long as the lawyer plans to be a partner with you. That's a good way to get a really valuable asset for the company without needing to spend any money really in the beginning, because if anything, they would help you buy in. They would give you money to start the company, knowing that, hoping that they're going to get some returns once some profits are made. So if I were to say the best source of funding, I would say get investors, just like that. Find people that want to invest, but more than just finding people with money, find people that are also able to contribute to the company in terms of skills, various resources. So maybe partnering with a doctor and partnering with a lawyer, and maybe partnering with another professional such as yourself that's really experienced in the industry. Maybe they has experience that you don't have. Those are good examples of people to want to partner with to create a company like this. All right, so the next part is to decide what specialties you want to work in. Do you want to work in dermatology, pulmonology, cancer, biotechnology, like neurovascular surgery devices, things like that? There's so many you could do. And you're going to want to strategize that based on maybe which physicians you have access to, which medical practices are around you maybe. There's a lot of reasons why you would choose various specialties, but I could tell you from experience, being a multi-specialty clinic for clinical research is ideal. It opens up the doors to a lot more clinical trials. You don't really want to hone in to, working in just one indication. You're going to limit yourself so much. It's stupid, right? So do a multi-specialty, figure out, how many physicians in different specialties you could work with in the beginning. I could tell you from experience, pulmonology is really good. Cardiology is really good. Dermatology is really good. Those work well with private practices, and there's a lot of clinical trials for those. Ophthalmology is another one that's pretty good. Nephrology is pretty good. So just, figure out essentially, being the expert you are in clinical research, which indications are best to join in at the time, because every year, the amount of trials in certain indications varies. So maybe like in a certain year, there's a lot of COPD clinical trials. So you're like, hey, if I'm starting the company now, I got to get in with the pulmonologist because I got to catch that wave, right? Maybe there's a lot of dermatology trials in a different year that you're starting. So you got to kind of gauge the industry when you're starting and figure out what would be good indications to get into. Now, another important thing is to figure out your pay structure. How do you want to pay people, right? One nice thing to do, which helps incentivize your people, right, is to give bonuses to your staff members based on like performance, right? So if they're enrolling a lot of patients, maybe you want to give them a small percentage of the profits that are generated for the clinical trials that they helped enroll for. If they are helping you be number one enrollers, you want to motivate them to keep doing that, right? So having a bonus structure is really important, I think. Also making sure you're paying them fair wages, right? Clinical research coordinators typically might want to make around $60,000 annually. So you got to keep that in mind when you're hiring people. In a startup, it's hard to pay people like that. So you might need to do a lot of the work yourself in the beginning. But as time goes on, you're going to need to hire employees. You're going to need to pay them. You're going to need to give bonuses, provide benefits like medical and so forth. So keep that in mind. You want to be competitive as a employer as well. And you want to be able to make sure your staff are incentivized to want to keep doing more and more to help your company grow. So performance-based bonuses, I think, are a good way to help accomplish that for your company. And then the last thing to talk about is really, you got to protect yourself. So having an LLC or any corporations is going to protect your personal assets, given that your corporate veil is strong, right? So look that up. There's lots of resources on how to make your corporate veil strong. But another thing is that it doesn't necessarily protect you per se, okay? They essentially is, if your corporate veil is strong, it'll make sure that your personal assets are not touchable, right? That only the assets of the company can be sued. But guess what? You can always be sued, right? So either way, you can always be sued, and you should have some general and professional liability insurance. That's really important. It can save your butt, if you're ever sued and you can't afford it. That insurance will kick in and will help cover those expenses. Another important thing is in your contracts, you want to make sure that if there's any litigation, that the sponsor is going to indemnify you and also pay for any sort of legal protection that you might need, any other associated costs with that litigation, so that it's not coming out of your pocket. So cover yourself with insurance and with language in your contracts. So anyways, guys, I hope you liked it. This is a lot of experience that I've had, throughout my career that I'm sharing with you. It's pretty unique, I feel, and I want to make sure I'm giving you guys value. And with that said, as I mentioned before, I have a consulting company. It's Lone Bear Industries. You can go ahead and shoot me an email right here. I'll put it up on the screen. If you want any consulting services, these topics that I just went over, this is my specialty, okay? Business development, creating companies, strategizing, making money, okay? That's my specialty. So if you want consulting services, be sure to shoot me an email. We can go over kind of what's involved, the fees associated. I can promise you I don't charge a lot, okay? I want our interests invested with each other, so I essentially don't want to make money unless you make money, all right? So be sure to reach out. Feel free to comment down below if you like this video, and that means hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell button, and see you guys at the next video.